All right, it's 101, so let's get started. My name is Carolyn Monin. I'm a health sciences librarian at University of Manitoba.
And I'm Justin Pure, so I'm working at the Science and Technology Libraries on the Fort Garry campus.
And today we're going to talk about Orchid and other researcher profile management tools. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We are recording this broadcast to launch at a later date. If you have any technical issues or questions, please put them in the question box and we'll be happy to get to them throughout the presentation. So you're all muted and you all have your videos off obviously. So all of your questions that you put in the question box are also anonymous. We're going to have polls throughout the session and all of your answers in those polls are also anonymous. So yeah, stay with us and we'll get through the session. All right. So some of the objectives today, we're going to create and maintain an Orchid identifier, or talk at least a little bit about how to create and maintain it. We're going to talk about other researcher profile management tools, specifically Publons, Scopus, Author ID, and Google Scholar Citations. And then we'll compare and contrast some of those profile sites and some of the key features that are available there. So we have a poll to get started. Which profile management tools are you familiar with? And select all that apply. There's no wrong answer here. So I'll give it a couple seconds for people to respond. Maybe 10 more seconds. All right. So most people are pretty familiar with all of these tools. That's great. So most people are familiar with Scopus, not so much Publons. So we'll get into that. Orchid and Google Scholar, it seemed like everyone kind of maybe knows the name, maybe knows what it's a little bit about, but wants to get some more information. So that's great. We'll get into that during the session. Okay, so next slide. Why create a researcher profile? Well, to make sure your research and your teaching activities are known, you are putting out your academic output out there online, and you want to be sure you get the most bang for your buck. Ensure that you get credit for your work in online databases. Distinguish yourself from other authors. This is especially the case. We'll talk a little bit more about name disambiguation and some of the tools that can help with that. It helps you connect with colleagues, potential collaborators, and potential employers, future employers. So there's lots of different reasons to create a profile. And then probably most important, research impact. So this plays into bibliometrics and your research impact factor. And so that's why we're talking about these tools today. So a bit more information about some of these sites. Orchid, if you think about all these sites like Scopus, Publons, Google Scholar, they kind of play into Orchid. So Orchid's kind of the overarching profile site. It's a persistent and permanent identifier. It helps with author disambiguation, and you have full control over the profile. So you have full control over the content that is put into Orchid. There's Scopus, where it's a little different. The ID, your author profile ID is assigned internally within Scopus, so you don't have as much control over that author ID, but it's an author profile within the Scopus database. Publons has more to do with peer review and your editorial contributions, so it has more to do with the publishing side of academia. And then there's Google Scholar Citations, which is your author profile in the Google Scholar database. So author ID systems, when you think about submitting your work or academics submitting their work, you're submitting your name, right? It's your name that's attached to it. That's the identifier. But the problem with that is that names are not always unique. Most of the time they're not unique. And so you need another method to ensure that your work is attributed to you. And that's why, so Orchid has the Orchid ID, that's their author identifier. So you register for an account, and instead of having your name attached to publications, you would have your Orchid ID, and that just ensures that your work is attributed to you. Same with Scopus. So Scopus has a Scopus ID. Anytime you submit an article for publication, and that article is indexed within Scopus, if you're a new author, Scopus will set up an author ID for you, and that's how they distinguish you from other people with your same name. With Publons, there's the Researcher ID, which was created in Web of Science, and then Google Scholar Citations, there's no author identifier. So there you're connecting through your Google account mostly, and your name. All right, so let's get into Orchid. So Orchid is a opt-in system. It stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. So it's available for free at orchid.org. There's no sign-in, there's no proxy with the U of M. You can go to the website and create your own account. It's free to register, free to use. You'll never have to pay anything with Orchid. It's a 16-digit unique identifier. So what happens is you sign up, you create a profile, and they give you a unique number, a 16-digit number, and that is your Orchid ID. And that's how you would, that's what you would attach to your profile whenever you're submitting papers, whenever you're submitting conferences or grants, etc. So that Orchid ID, that identifier, stays with you throughout your academic career. Orchid supports over 37 different types of work. So it's not just articles that you can add to your Orchid profile. You can also add conference proceedings, conference posters, patents, any intellectual property that you have, standards, reports. There's a huge wide range of things that you can attach to your Orchid profile. So it's kind of nice because Scopus and Publons and even Google Scholar, they sort of give you pieces of your academic what you produce academically, whereas Orchid, all of that can fit within your Orchid profile. And of course, it's a nonprofit entity. Yeah, so Orchid, another thing to mention is you sign up for your own registry, but it's also a searchable registry of other identifiers. So you can find other people within that registry. So why sign up? One of the first things I mentioned was name disambiguation. So, you know, if you're submitting a paper, let's say John Roberts is submitting a paper, that on the publication side of it, it could be John Roberts, but it could also be J. Roberts. Or let's say his middle name is A, it would be J.A. Roberts. He could be known as Dr. Roberts, Professor Roberts. So you put your name out there, but there's a lot of different variations of your name, right, in academia. So that number that is created within Orchid helps to confirm which John Roberts we're talking about. So name disambiguation is a big reason why to sign up. And this also helps too if you change your name at any point within your career. So if your last name changes midway, the work that you did prior to your name change and with your name change always stays with you. Another reason to sign up would be that you're opting in, you're adding that information. So this is an example of what Orchid would look like on our end. So this person's put in their employment history, their membership and service. But this information that you put in once, it's a lot of manual labor up front, but then this information stays with you. So you might move from institution to institution, but your Orchid always stays the same. It's portable, it goes with you. And so this content never has to be updated again. Or sorry, it does need to be updated, but it doesn't need to change. And then finally for works. So as I mentioned off the top, Orchid has over 37 different types of publications or works that it supports. And so it will take pieces from Scopus, from Crossref, from DataCite. It supports all these different types of works that you can put in one profile, in one spot. And then finally, one of the big reasons why is that more and more grant and publisher organizations are requiring Orchid. They need you to sign up for an Orchid and submit your Orchid when you're submitting a grant application or when you're submitting a publication. So Tri-Agency now requires this, and then other publishers like Wiley, PLOS, Springer Nature, etc. So what happens is Tri-Agency is actively working to integrate Orchid such that the Orchid record will pre-populate your grant application. So it saves time on that administrative side, and it makes less work, avoids redundancy or errors, and it enables tracking throughout the life cycle of the research cycle. So this is some examples of Orchid in action. You'll see on the left-hand side there, that is a screenshot. I just got a screen grab from an article. That second author there, they have that little green symbol, that green circle with the ID in the middle. That indicates that that person has an Orchid ID. In this case, you could click through to see this person's Orchid profile. And so it just helps to ensure that the person that wrote this article is properly attributed, that all of their work is accessible. And then on the right-hand side, you have Justin's email signature. So he put in his Orchid ID at the bottom there, and that can encourage collaboration and just ensures, again, that you get an accurate sense of someone's academic profile. And then in our last example, we have, this is an example from Scopus. So this is the author profile ID in Scopus, which Justin will get into in a little bit more, but you can link both. And what's really nice is that, Scopus has your list of publications. It has your affiliation, your current affiliation there, and maybe some collaborators are listed there as well. But adding that Orchid ID will ensure that your entire academic scope is available as well. All right, so to create your profile, you just go to orchid.org/register to create your profile. As I said, it's free to sign up. It's quite easy to fill it out. It takes less than a minute. You just need your name, institution, and then you'll need to decide your visibility settings. So there are 3 options for visibility settings. There is public, everyone, trusted parties only, which is yellow, and then only me, so making it private. You can lock different sections of your CV, so if there's particular past education or past employment that you want to keep hidden, you can do that, and you can change it at any point. It doesn't need to, you don't have to make the decision then and there, but as you're registering your account, you will be asked about some of this. So what that means, everyone, obviously it's public, it's searchable, your name is searchable in that Orchid registry. Trusted parties mean that you have to grant access to either view your entire profile or that section of your CV or your Orchid profile. So that's either organizations that you grant access to that you allow to fill in that your Orchid information. We'll get there in just a minute, or you can make it private as well. So creating your profile, there is a bit of work to start with. So there are 4 sections: employment, education, invited positions, distinctions, and membership and service. Those 4 sections, unfortunately, you have to enter that information manually. So it does take a little work, but once it's there, it's done, and you won't need to redo any of that information. So that's nice. The last 2 sections, funding and works, it's a little easier there. There's search and link functions, and we'll show you how to do that. So I'm just going to take control. All right, can you see my screen? It looks like you can. So this is orchid.org. This is what the website looks like. I just went directly there, so there's no proxy. I don't need to sign in through U of M to access it. I've already created an account, so I'm going to go to sign in/register. So you'll have two options here. You'll have your personal account and an institutional account. We're going to get into the institutional account in just a minute, but if you don't have a personal account, you will need to create one. You won't be able to sign in just with your institutional account. So I've created an account. I'm just going to sign in. Luckily, my browser remembered my history here. All right, so this is what it looks like on the back end. You'll see on the left-hand side there's my name and my Orchid ID. If I had changed my name at any point, or if, if my middle name's A, so if I was also known as CA Monin, I can add that information there. You can add country keywords. That's kind of helpful for talking about your research interests. If you have a specific website, you could add that there. And then emails are here. So as I said, your emails might change, but your Orchid always stays consistent. And so this is where you can add extra emails if you'd like. So I have my employment history, education qualifications, and here just to add that information, you would go to this plus box on the right-hand side. It says add employment. And then I would have to manually enter my, my information here. I can set the visibility, so I can make it public, trusted parties only, or private right away. If at any point I wanted to hide that information, I just select that on the right-hand side. So it's really easy to navigate. And for this, I mean, you don't need to add all of your education, all of your employment, but it is nice just to put in as much information as possible so that people can find you and verify that it's you. All right, for funding, this is where we get into the fun part. So you can add a grant manually if you prefer to do that, or if you're unable to find it through the search and link. But I'm going to test out the search and link here. So what this search and link does is it grants permission to Dimensions Wizard to search Dimension Wizard, either my name, or I can search by the grant. And then Dimensions Wizard will input that information into my Orchid account. So I'm just going to click on that. I've already granted permission to Dimensions Wizard, but before I move forward, the first time I did it, I had to grant them permission to, as a trusted party, so that they could access and input that information into my Orchid account. If you don't want that, then you have every right not to do that, and you would add the grant information manually that way. So here you can search by name. You can search your name to find your list of grants. You can also search by find grant title. So I can type in CIHR. So over 1,300 grants were found. That's fun to go through, but you'll notice the names are attached here. So it makes it easier to figure out which one is yours. You would just select the box next to the grant that you want to add to your Orchid account and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And then hit next. And that will take you back. You just need to confirm. And then once you confirm, it will automatically input it into your Orchid account. So it's very straightforward. Similar with works. So there's quite a few different options here. You can add your works manually, and that works best if you're adding either intellectual properties, so any patents that you might have and you want to include, you can add that there. For conference proceedings, oftentimes that information will be found through Crossref, which we'll get to in just a minute, but conference posters might not be added there, so if you want to do that, you can add conference poster, and then just add as much information as you feel is necessary. Your other options for your works, You can import your citations as a bib text. If you have that information, you can add an article by a PubMed ID. In this case, you have to add it individually. You can't add all of your PubMed IDs at once. You have to go through it one by one. Similar with your DOI. If you have an archive ID, so a preprint ID, you can add it there as well. And then similarly to funding, we also have the search and link option. And there's a few here I wanted to point out. So Crossref and DataCite, these are two good resources to grant trusted individual or trusted status to. With Crossref, I think I mentioned it, or maybe I didn't, but what happens is when you're submitting an article for publication and you attach your Orchid ID, that Orchid ID is metadata that gets attached to the DOI of that article. So your Orchid ID stays with that article through the publication phase, and when it is published and a DOI is attached to it, that get Crossref, how Crossref works is through DOIs. And so when your Orchid is attached to the DOI, then it's easy to bring that information, so your articles, your publications into your Orchid ID, and so it auto-populates that way. So that's quite handy. And similarly, it works the same way with DataCite as well. DataCite are for your data management. And then the other one to grant permission to would be Scopus. And so Justin will get into Scopus a little bit more, but this, by accepting Scopus or by allowing it to be a trusted individual, any of your publications that are within Scopus will automatically be added to your Orchid account. So it just makes it nice. You don't have to do a lot of that heavy duty work to make sure that your publications are accurately reflected within your Orchid profile. So that is Orchid. If you have any questions, please add them to the question box. But I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So I'm going to grant Justin the All right, so some profile tips, your Orchid profile tips. If you're in your early career, then I would add more details about place of work, your peer review activity, conference presentations, that sort of thing. If you're more of an established researcher, then adding your service work, again, peer review activity, but also making sure that all of your publications, all of your academic works are within that work list, and you can work with a librarian too. We're happy to work with you to make sure that all of that information is there within your Orchid profile. So linking your profile. I kind of touched on this a little bit when we signed into Orchid, but U of M now, there's the ability to link your Orchid account to University of Manitoba, which is really handy. It's quite easy to do once you set up your own personal account. Instead of, when you go to sign in, instead of selecting that personal account, you would select institutional account. You would search University of Manitoba, hit continue, and then you'll need to sign in with your U of M email and password, and then it links to your account, and that's it. And you only have to do it once. You don't have to do it again, which is really nice. And it's helpful for U of M because it helps U of M to save your research output into a machine-readable format. So it just allows better bibliometrics, the possibility of better bibliometrics for the university, and also it helps enable or determine true affiliation to University of Manitoba. And then as well, linking your Scopus author ID to your Orchid account. So you can do that on the back end, which I just showed you, by linking your works to Scopus, and but Justin will go through more of that in a little bit. So trusted individuals. These are the people that will have access to your account and can view your account if you've set it to that yellow trusted individual status. If you have someone who helps you, if you have an assistant that you would like to grant permissions so that they can edit your ORCID profile. What they need to do is create their own ORCID ID, so create their own ORCID username and password, and then you would grant them through their ORCID ID permission to edit your ORCID ID. So it's really straightforward. We can help you set this up too if you need more clarification on how it works. But it's very simple. There's a place where you just click to allow this person to edit your account, and then you can decide to change it at any time. So some tips on maintaining your profile. Always use your ORCID when submitting your publications, your data sets, any conferences you're attending where it allows you to do that. You're submitting for a grant, entering your ORCID ID, and in some cases, as I mentioned, that ORCID ID will auto-populate some of that administrative bibliographic data, which is really helpful. Authorizing Crossref and Scopus to update your ORCID profile, and then keeping your profile relevant. So, you know, if you're updating your CV once a year, every 6 months, at the same time you're updating your CV, maybe you want to jump into ORCID and make sure that your CV and ORCID match up, and that those publications that you've done within the last year are actually within ORCID, and that your profile is up to date. One interesting thing that we noticed recently with the influx of COVID research is that a lot of registries were asking for your ORCID ID just to verify authorship and to improve the publication cycle so it would go a little faster. So it's becoming more and more important that you have that ORCID ID. I'm going to go, I have 2 quick polls for you, just to sort of think about the things we just talked about with ORCID. So true or false? ORCID will auto-generate your list of publications if you link your account to Crossref or Scopus. What do you think? Is that true or false? I'll just give you maybe 5 more seconds. It looks like most people have voted. All right, that is true. Everyone got it right. Great. Okay, one more question. True or false? You can only add articles that were published in a peer-reviewed journal to ORCID. Is that true or false? In just a couple more seconds. Looks like most people have voted. All right, that is false. So most people got that right. You can add way more than just articles. Maybe this was a little tricky question, but you can add more than articles to your ORCID ID. You can add conferences, patents. There's 37 different things that you can, over 37 different things that you can add to your ORCID account. All right, let's get back to the PowerPoint. So how the library can help. We work with you to create and maintain your account. We can help troubleshoot any problems that you might have with it. We can help with that name disambiguation that I mentioned at the beginning. So if you're having trouble distinguishing your work from another person with your similar name, we can help with that. Contacting publishers for corrections and strategies to improve your ORCID as well. There's a whole variety of things we can help with, and we'll get into that a little bit more later too. And now I'll pass it over to Justin.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So, great. Here we go. Okay, so thanks for covering ORCID, Carolyn. So we're going to move on to some of the other researcher profiles and author ID systems, some of which you can use to integrate with your ORCID profile. So we're going to start with Scopus here. So Scopus, you may or may not be familiar with it, but it's a large multidisciplinary abstract citation database. So it has content in, science, technology, medicine. It also has some content in social sciences and humanities. Less content, but it's still there. So authors have a Scopus author identifier called the author ID. So this is automatically assigned when you have 2 or more publications that are indexed by Scopus. So you can kind of think of it as Scopus isn't necessarily indexing, every single journal that exists, but it has certain journals that they will index, and then every article, ideally, that the journal publishes, then they'll use that, they'll index those articles into their database, and they'll have, I'm sure you've all seen it, so they'll have an abstract, and then they'll actually have a way to access the article as well. But in terms of your Scopus ID, so Carolyn mentioned it earlier, but your Scopus ID is only used within Scopus to differentiate between the different authors in Scopus. So it would be very rare for anyone to ask you kind of like, what's your Scopus ID, or to record it anywhere, because it's not really used outside of Scopus. So you may have more than one Scopus ID, and so this can occur when the Scopus database doesn't differentiate between different pieces of metadata of indexed works. So even though you may have published a number of different articles, Scopus isn't necessarily knowing that you're the one that published each of these. So it may be that you have 2, 3, 4, maybe more profiles with certain articles that you've published in each Scopus ID. So in these cases, you can always contact Scopus to correct the author details. So you can contact them, and they'll either merge those profiles or fix it up in that way. You can also, if you know, for example, that a certain journal is indexed by Scopus and you published in it, you can contact them to get that article to appear if it's not already in their database. So, for example, Nature is indexed by Scopus, but if you publish something in Nature and you search for it a few months later, or when it's published, and it's not showing up, then you can contact Scopus to fix that problem. So in your Scopus profile, once you have it made, and it's automatically created for you by Scopus when you have 2 or more works. So once you have your Scopus profile up, you'll see that when you click on your Scopus ID or other people's Scopus IDs, you can view their citation metrics. So again, this is only for works that are indexed in Scopus. Only those works would appear on your Scopus author profile. But you'd be able to view the H-index, which is slightly problematic, especially in light of Scopus not indexing all of your work that you may have published. But basically the H-index is the highest number of papers with at least the same number of citations. So if you published 2 papers and each have at least 2 citations, then you'd have an H-index of 2. And so Scopus also provides other document and citation analysis. I'll show you an example of that in a second. So again, the profile is only available for authors that have papers published in journals indexed by Scopus. So that may or may not be the case for you, and it may be later on. But in any case, you should know that these profiles are automatically created, and you should at least spend some time managing them, just to make sure that basically you're, like Carolyn was saying earlier, your research impact is kind of the greatest that it can be. So one of the nice tools that's offered within Scopus, so you can integrate it with your Orchid account, Carolyn had mentioned earlier. So this will then automatically index any works that are added to your Scopus profile, author profile. It'll be added to your Orchid profile as well. So once you have that initial integration set up, you can always be checking your Orchid profile or check it once in a while. But you can know that your Scopus works are going to be pushed into your Orchid profile. So here's a screenshot of a U of M researcher. So you can see that there's their name. You can see their affiliation, institutional affiliation, the department they work in, other names that they use. subject areas, and then different document citation trends. So you can see, the first articles that were published by Fred Aoki were in 2008, and then you can see it goes to, well, here it's going to 2018, and then you can see different trends with that. There would be, if you had scrolled down on this screen, you can see that the documents are listed. So you would see all of those citations of all of those published documents, again, with various information in terms of citations and then other authors, abstracts, things like that. So moving on to Publons, this is a fairly new system. It was previously called Web of Science Researcher ID. And in fact, the Web of Science Researcher ID still exists, but it's kind of used in a different way. So now Publons is primarily for tracking and verifying peer review and editorial activity. And however, you can also include publication information, including non-Web of Science indexed publications. So if you set up your Publons account, so this one you're actually having to go in to set it up. Now you may or may not have a Web of Science Researcher ID already created for you. That depends if you have published anything that's indexed by the Web of Science database. So separate from Scopus, these are two different, but similar to Scopus, where these are two different databases that index various journals and articles. So like I was saying, Publons is fairly new. So in April 2019, all of the Web of Science Researcher IDs that, public researcher IDs were moved onto the Publons system and basically had a profile created for you. So the Web of Science Researcher ID is essentially like Scopus ID that we just covered, but in Publons, you create your own profile and it'll carry forward that same researcher ID. And in Publond, you can choose what kind of content to include. So in that way, it's sort of similar to Orchid. Whereas with the old researcher ID, it was automatically assigned when you had works indexed by Web of Science. And so again, it provides review and citation metrics, there's no review metrics in Scopus, but in Publons, you get both review and citation metrics. And also you can push your Publons information into Orchid, including your peer review activity. So when you link your Publons profile to Orchid, you'll have the option to push this content into Orchid. And vice versa, you can choose to have Orchid bring over your publications into your Publons profile. So it kind of goes both ways, and you can choose to do one or the other or both. And so you wouldn't have this, I covered that already, but just to reiterate that Publons isn't created for you. Your Web of Science Researcher ID is created for you, whereas Publons, you create your profile, and when you create a Publons profile, you're also assigned a Web of Science Researcher ID. So it's kind of like, you can think of it if you have works in Web of Science, it will have a researcher ID, but it'll have very little information associated with that. Whereas when you create your Publons, then if you also have works indexed in Web of Science, you could click on that researcher ID, be taken to your Publons profile, and really showcase kind of how active you are in your different subject area or scholarly community in terms of serving on editorial boards of journals, doing peer review, things like that. So you can really get credit for and showcase this this activity that may or may not be covered by some of the other researcher profiles. So here is another screenshot by a different U of M researcher, faculty member. So you can see there's, and this is in Publons. So you can see that there's a name, institutional affiliation again, or department, and then this really highlights reviews. So this would be the first thing you see when you go on their profile. And then if you'd scroll down, you would see additional review metrics. And then I don't have a screenshot of it, but if you go down further, then it would show specific peer review contributions made. Sorry, not specific in terms of listing, you know, what exactly they were reviewing, but in terms of different ways to display their peer review metrics. So moving on to Google Scholar Citations. So this is a free profile, but it requires a Google account. So Google Scholar Citations calculates citation metrics as well. So again, you have the H metrics, or sorry, H index. And then you also have something unique to Google Scholar. They call it the I-10 index. So this is the number of published papers you have that have been cited at least 10 times. So anything with any work you have that has been cited in other papers at least 10 times. And here you can set your profile to be private or public. If you add your institutional email address with a public profile, you'll add those publications to Google Scholar's search results as well. The drawback to Google Scholar is it's not integrated with Orchid, but you can import your publications that are on your Google Scholar Citations profile into Orchid using what's called a Bib Text File. So basically, it's kind of like this file format that contains all of the citation information, kind of in a different way for these different systems to read it. So basically, you would click a button, it would export this file onto your computer, and then you would go into your Orchid account and then import it into there. So this would be useful, for example, if you have a large number of citations in Google Scholar, but let's say you also have, let's say you were really eager and you also had Scopus author profile in terms of, you know, again, having those 2 or more articles indexed in Scopus, and you've been, you know, even more eager and you have also a Publons account on Web of Science. So if you have publications that are appearing in Google Scholar, which you can add these publications as well, but they're not on Scopus or Web of Science, you maybe would want to import this over, and rather than adding it all manually, if you already have this account or profile set up, you can just click a button, exports this file, and then you just import it into your Orchid profile, and all of those works would appear there. So this is an example of a Google Scholar profile. So again, this is a faculty member in the EER. And so, I mean, fairly basic, but you can see it focuses on the citations here. The metrics section is a little off to the side. It's not as robust as maybe Scopus or Publons is. But you can see all of the titles here, and you can keep scrolling down, see all of them, and then it also gives you a link. So this faculty member had linked to his homepage, U of Manitoba homepage as well, just for extra, you know, that maybe someone would be interested in viewing that information. So before we get to the next slide, I was just going to run a quick quiz to just review kind of what we were talking about here. Okay, so the poll should be appearing on screen. While you guys are filling that out, it's kind of like there's all these different options for using you know, these different researcher profiles. You may or may not want to create a Publons account. Maybe you're not doing very much peer review. You may or may not want a Google Scholar Citations account because kind of, you know, it indexes different works there compared to Scopus and Web of Science. Maybe your subject area, not many people use Google Scholar Citations, and so you'd want to focus maybe on some of the other ones. So it's really up to you on how to you know, create how many of these profiles to create. So it looks like most of you guys got the question right there. So it'd be Publons and Orchid that you would use to really highlight your peer review activity. So again, this is not indexed anywhere. This is you adding this information to your profile. And I'll just go back to my screen here. Okay. And so in terms of which author ID system to use, again, it's, the recommendation is to use more than one, but keeping in mind the time that you would need to update, manage these different profiles. Some have specific purposes, like we just covered in the quiz, Publons for peer review. One suggestion, maybe look in your field for what are other people using, what sites are they using. You'll notice that Orchid is one of the more common of these profiles, and that just reflects kind of the all-encompassing nature of the site. It's not a nonprofit, so it's kind of like your information is maybe not being used for commercial purposes, but compared to Clarivate with Scopus. So again, just create as many profiles as you have time to keep up to date. It's kind of like using social media. You don't want your account to seem really empty. That's almost worse, having this profile set up but then nothing there. So it's kind of like if people are looking at it, doesn't show very much. So some profiles are auto-generated, so you don't even really have to worry about going through and creating it. But again, you'd want to, in Scopus, you'd want to just make sure that that Scopus isn't creating all of these different profiles, 8 different profiles with your publications spread all over. You want to kind of get that merged together and then ideally forward that to your Orchid profile if you have that set up. So Publons is a user-generated profile which links to an auto-generated ID from Web of Science. But again, for example, I don't have works indexed in Web of Science currently. So when I created a Publons account, it assigns me a Web of Science researcher ID. So wrapping up, here's a table looking at specific reasons to use particular researcher profile sites. Me and Carolyn have actually added this to a PDF in the handout section of the webinar, so you can download that if you'd like. We also have a copy of the presentation if you wanted to go back and look at anything, if we maybe were going too quickly. So as I go through this table, or just before I go through this table, I'll just start up one last poll to see if me or Carolyn have convinced any of you to set up some of these accounts. And you may already have some of these accounts already set up, but we're just kind of curious on what people are thinking about. So let's give that a few more seconds here. Okay, I'll just close it here and I'll share the results. So that's really good that people are thinking about Orchid. Orchid, I was telling Carolyn, I kind of look at it as kind of like the godfather of these researcher profiles. So it's been around for a little while now. It's, like I say, nonprofit. It encompasses so many pieces of your researcher, lack of a better word, researcher profile, or like the full scope of what you're involved in academically, scholarly. And also Publons is good. Again, it gives you that different, ability to add in your peer review, which may or may not be available with other systems. So Orchid, again, it integrates with a lot of different other systems. It's becoming mandatory for certain grant applications as well, and also certain journals. So if you're trying to publish in PLOS or IEEE, you may or may not be required to have an Orchid account already set up, not to mention the ease of access in terms of applying for certain grants. It'll use that information and fill fill out part of your grant application. And your U of M login is nice. It also links it links to our institutional instance of Orchid. I'm not totally sure on how that is hosted, but basically it allows for more, like, just encompassing your full researcher profile at the U of M, kind of gives you that more impact. In terms of Scopus, you really want to be sure that your profile is your profile in Scopus, that other people aren't kind of taking credit for your work. You want to make sure that's up to date. Again, has author metrics and integrates with Orchid. Publons, we've said it a few times now, 3 or 4 times at least, that peer review and editorial contributions, again, that transfers into the metrics that it displays, and it also integrates with Orchid. Google Scholar Citations, may or may not have heard of it before this. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Google Scholar, but in terms of having a profile that you keep up to date, maybe not, you've heard of it, but it's popular in humanities also due to just more expansive content and indexing our articles. You can make your account private, and you can also have author metrics, but again, they're not very robust. And so in terms of getting help from the libraries, so we do host sessions like this, kind of educating people, but we can also take a more hands-on approach to providing assistance. So we can, as it says on the screen there, set up, manage researcher IDs, profiles, merge 2 or more Scopus accounts, help you with that. We can help you set up integration with your Orchid account, Scopus account, or other accounts. If you have any questions, you can email us. You can set up appointments, or right now online appointments, or over the phone. And we can also, if you ever have any questions on which profile to use or author ID system to use, we can advise you on maybe what would be best for your subject area or kind of what you want to highlight. And so you can contact our library's research services digital strategies department. So they're really in charge of these initiatives on, from the library side, but also campus-wide. So they would be a great resource to use if you need any help with this. And their email is down there. So we have time for some questions. There was a question earlier I had answered during Carolyn's presentation. Also, our contact information is there if you ever want to get in touch. And again, all of those handouts are available here. Or sorry, there's 2 of them. The slide deck here, and then the table kind of showing reasons why you would use a certain profile site over others. So I'm just reading the, okay, so I know there's one other recent question here, but a question that was asked earlier is, what if I already had a personal Orchid account? Can I still log in with an institutional account from U of M? So the answer is yes. So this has actually happened to me. So I already had an Orchid account set up, and then U of M instituted this institutional account sometime last year. And so basically you would first sign in to, when you first log into Orchid, there's 2 options. It'll say personal or institutional. I think Carolyn had a screenshot of that, or she was showing on her computer. So you would choose institutional, and then you would sign in using your UMNet ID and password. And then it'll prompt you to link your account with a previously created account. So there you would enter your the email and password that you had used originally, and it'll kind of link those accounts together, not in the sense of creating a new account. It'll just allow you to use your institutional login with that existing account. And so we have another question. Someone asks, if I create an Orchid account and a Scopus account, do I have to update both individually? For example, if I update my Scopus account and have linked it to Orchid, will it be updated in my Orchid account? Yes. So let's say you have linked them already. Well, exactly as this question was saying. Okay, there's The only thing that I would say in that second piece in terms of updating my Scopus account, so you can't really update your Scopus account in the same way that you can update your Publons account or Orchid. So Scopus will index these articles, and those will be attributed to a specific Scopus ID. So if you have already made sure that you're the only, Justin Fuhrer there with all of my appropriate works added to a single Scopus ID, I'm linking that single Scopus ID to my Orchid account. Now, whenever a work is indexed in Scopus that is attributed to my Scopus ID, that's going to be added to my Orchid account. The trouble arises is if Scopus doesn't realize that there's already a Scopus ID for myself and they create a new one. So that work wouldn't be added automatically to your Orchid account. You would need to make sure, but it would if it's added to the right Scopus ID. So in that circumstance, what you would need to do is just merge those Scopus IDs into the one that you were already using. And so that you can contact the library for help, or if you're searching in Scopus for authors, do an author search, you can do that yourself. So you can tick off some boxes and then say merge account. It'll send a request to Scopus. But again, if you need any help with that, for sure, contact the library. But to answer the question, yes, it will update as long as it's associated with the correct Scopus ID.
And I would say to add to that, Justin, that's why it's important to submit your Orchid account number when you're submitting your publications so that that duplication, that author duplication doesn't happen in Scopus.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just give a few more seconds if anyone has any other questions. So I'll just take this opportunity to again highlight Research Services. Contact them with questions. They also have a website set up there. Again, if you download the slide deck, you can access that. And there's more information on setting up these researcher profiles. And finally, if you want to give feedback on today's session, just type in that bit.ly link there, and it's just a short survey. We always want to try to, take your feedback into consideration for future sessions. And because we've been doing a lot of these online sessions, it's even more valuable just to, incorporate some of those suggestions into our future sessions. So I'm not sure if Carolyn has anything more to say.
We do have a new question. So do any of these profiles link to other broader career sites like LinkedIn or Researchgate? That's a really good question. For LinkedIn, I know when I displayed the Orchid profile, you can add websites and you can add social media. So you can add your LinkedIn profile there. In terms of the other way around, I believe there's a place on LinkedIn where you can add your Orchid information, and I believe it's the same with Researchgate. Do you have any idea, Justin?
No, sorry, I'm not sure on that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So that's a really good question. We can look into that too for you, Sarah. But there is a way to link your LinkedIn or your from Orchid to link to your LinkedIn or Researchgate. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then we'll stick around, Justin and I, for the next couple of minutes if anyone else has any more questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and always contact us if you have any questions going forward.
Thanks, everyone.